The first thing my daughter took was my phone password. The second thing she took was my savings. The third thing she took was my right to say no. My name is Francine Gallant. I was 67 years old when Leanne drove me to Rideau Gardens retirement residence on a gray October morning and told the woman at the front desk that I had become a danger to myself. She said it quietly, the way she said most things, with one hand resting on my shoulder, as though she were steadying me rather than holding me in place. I had been a bookseller for 25 years. Walter and I opened the shop the spring after Leanne was born, in a narrow storefront on Princess Street in Kingston with a red door and window boxes full of geraniums that never quite survived past September. We called it Corner Leaf Books. We sold paperbacks and local history, and the kind of slow novels that people picked up on their way to the cottage. There were years when we barely paid ourselves. There were years when the space heater gave out in February and we wore our coats behind the counter. But there was always a kettle on and a cat asleep on the poetry shelf and the smell of old paper that I still think of as the smell of Walter. Walter was a civil engineer who had spent most of his career on infrastructure contracts for the province. He was careful with money in the way that men who grew up without enough of it tend to be. He tracked everything in a green ledger he kept in the top drawer of his desk. He paid the mortgage 15 years early. He put money into RRSPs every February without fail, and moved some of it into a TFSA once those became available, because he said it was foolish not to use an account the government handed you for free. When we sold Corner Leaf Books, 12 years before he got sick, the proceeds went into a mix of GICs and a modest investment portfolio managed through our branch at TD. I understood our finances the way I understood how to close the shop at the end of the day. Through practice, through familiarity, through 30 years of paying attention. Walter died of pancreatic cancer 18 months before any of this happened. The diagnosis came in March, and he was gone by November. I do not have words for that 8-month stretch that feel equal to what it actually was. I will only say that by December, I had stopped being able to remember what the house sounded like when he was in it, and that forgetting frightened me more than anything else. Leanne had always been competent. She was a certified financial planner, which later struck me as either ironic or appropriate depending on how charitable I was feeling. Her husband Brent worked in commercial real estate. They had a daughter, my granddaughter Bryn, who was in her second year of environmental science at Queen's and who called me every Sunday without being asked. After Walter died, Leanne began visiting every weekend. She brought groceries. She drove me to my GP appointments. She learned the names of my neighbors and asked after them. I was grateful. You cannot help being grateful when someone shows up consistently, even when later you have cause to wonder what they were showing up for. The first time Leanne asked to borrow money, she said Brent's brokerage had hit a dry patch, and they needed to bridge a gap before a commission payment cleared. She said it was a matter of 6 weeks. She asked for $45,000. I transferred it from my savings account because she was my daughter, and because Walter had always believed in family. She repaid $12,000 4 months later and explained the rest away with a story about a deal that had stalled. I told her not to worry. I believed she would sort it out. The second time, Brent needed capital to close on an investment property before someone else moved on it. The window was 48 hours, Leanne said. They would lose the whole thing if they didn't act now. She asked for $90,000. I said I would think about it overnight. By morning, she had texted me 4 times. I transferred the money. She sent me a photograph of a building in Barhaven that I have never seen in person. After the second transfer, I noticed that Leanne had started commenting on things she had no reason to know. She mentioned that one of my GIs was coming up for renewal. She asked whether I had considered consolidating my accounts. She said that keeping money in multiple places made it harder to see the full picture, and that she could help me simplify things. I told her I had been managing my own accounts since before she was born, and that I liked being able to see each piece separately. She smiled at me the way you smile at someone who has just said something a little sad. She brought in a financial advisor, a man named Mr. Bourgeois, from a firm I had never heard of, and arranged a meeting at her dining room table without asking me first. I went because I was curious. The man asked me questions about my assets, and I answered them correctly and completely. He suggested moving everything into a consolidated account that Leanne could monitor. I said no. On the drive home, Leanne told me I was making things unnecessarily complicated. I told her I found things perfectly clear. She said that sometimes, when people had been through a significant loss, their judgment shifted in ways they didn't notice themselves. I asked her what she meant. She said she just wanted me to be safe. That phrase, "I just want you to be safe," I would hear it many more times in the weeks that followed. Safe when she suggested I stop driving after dark. Safe when she offered to manage my mail. safe when she installed a small camera at my front door and said it was because there had been package thefts in the neighborhood. I did not know of any package thefts, but I let the camera stay because I was not ready to make it into a confrontation. Then I found the form. It was in a folder on my kitchen counter, which I had not placed there, a continuing power of attorney for property, with my name typed at the top and Leanne's enlisted as the attorney. Attached to it was a letter from Mr. Bourgeois suggesting the arrangement was a practical measure for managing my affairs given recent events. I could not identify what recent events he meant. I had not fallen. I had not become confused. I had refused to consolidate my accounts. I called my estate lawyer, Mr. Dufresne, who had handled Walter's will and the shop sale. He told me not to sign anything and to come to his office as soon as I could. He also told me to call my bank directly and place a note on my file requesting that any change of contact information or account access require my in-person confirmation. I did both things the same afternoon. When Leanne arrived the next morning and found the folder still unsigned, her face went through several expressions before settling on concern. She said I was hurting her feelings. I said I hadn't signed because I wanted Mr. Dufresne to review the document first. She said involving lawyers in family matters was a sign that I didn't trust her. I said it was a sign I was being careful. She left without staying for tea, which she had not done since Walter died. 2 weeks later, my bank flagged an attempted online transfer from my savings account. The transfer had been initiated from a device on my home network. It was for $260,000, directed to a numbered company I did not recognize. The bank blocked it because the amount exceeded my usual transaction threshold and required secondary confirmation through my phone. My phone was in my hand when the notification came. I had not initiated the transfer. I called Leanne. She said there must have been an error. I said the bank had told me the login credentials used were mine, and the transfer had been deliberate. She said I must have clicked something by mistake. I told her I did not click things by mistake. She became quiet in the way she became quiet before she said something very calm and very final. "Mum," she said, "I'm worried about you. This kind of thing, misremembering, misclicking, it happens. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. It just means you might need a little more support." I told her I was going to speak with Mr. Dufresne and the police. She said that if I involved the police, the bank would likely freeze my accounts pending investigation, and that during a freeze, I would have difficulty paying my bills, my property taxes, my utilities. She said it would be easier for everyone if I allowed her to step in temporarily while we got to the bottom of it. I told her I would handle things myself. She said I wasn't being realistic. I called the police. The detective was thorough and polite, and ultimately told me that because the login credentials were mine, and the device was registered to my home network, the investigation would take time, and they could not compel Leanne to return any funds without direct evidence. He told me to keep every record I had and to contact my financial institutions immediately. I had already done both. 3 days later, Leanne arrived with Brent and a woman from Rideau Gardens. They came in the mid-morning when I had just come in from watering the pots on the back step. Leanne had a folder. The woman from Rideau Gardens had a brochure. She told me I would have my own room, a dining room with windows, weekly outings to the market, a nurse on every floor. She said a lot of things she had clearly said many times before to many families standing in many kitchens. I did not listen to most of them. I told Leanne to get out of my house. She said she was not leaving. She said she had spoken to my GP's office and that there were concerns about my capacity, and that under the provincial process, she had applied to act as my substitute decision-maker. She said it was not permanent, just until things were sorted out. I asked which of my doctors had raised concerns. She said it was Dr. Narayanan's office. Dr. Narayanan had been treating me for mild osteoarthritis for 3 years. I had never had a cognitive concern raised at any appointment. I called Dr. Narayanan's office from the kitchen. The receptionist said no capacity referral had been submitted from their file. When I told Leanne this, she said there must be some confusion and that these things took time to process. Brent put his hand on my elbow and said, very gently, that everyone just wanted what was best for me. I pulled my arm away. I told him his name was on 2 personal loans totaling more than $100,000, and that I would not be taking advice from him about what was best for me. I went upstairs to call Mr. Dufresne. Leanne followed me. When I reached for my phone, she picked it up first and put it in her jacket pocket. She said she was going to hold on to it because I was getting myself worked up and it wasn't helping anyone. I looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. By early afternoon, I was in the car. The room at Rideau Gardens had pale carpeting and a window looking onto a parking structure. The woman at the front desk gave me a lanyard with my name on it and a key card that opened my room and the main dining floor and nothing else. Leanne signed the admission forms and listed herself as my primary contact. She told the floor supervisor I had been experiencing memory lapses and had become suspicious of family members trying to help me. The supervisor wrote things on a tablet while Leanne spoke. I told the supervisor the exact date, the balance of my savings account before the transfer attempt, and the name of the detective handling my file. The supervisor said she would make a note of my concerns. For the first 4 days, I stayed in my room. I ate the trays they brought and watched the light change on the parking structure and wrote everything down in a notebook I'd had in my cardigan pocket when they brought me in. The date. What I had eaten. Who had called the desk. What Leanne had said when she called. She called every day. I could hear the supervisor's end of the conversations when the hallway was quiet. Leanne had already forwarded my mail to Rideau Gardens care of her own name. She had called the utilities and house insurance and listed herself as the account holder. Mr. Dufresne didn't know where I was for the first 5 days because Leanne hadn't told him, and I had no phone. On the 6th day, I asked a care worker named Carol if she could make an outgoing call for me from the staff line. Carol was a woman in her late 40s who brought me tea without being asked and who had said, on the 3rd day, that she had noticed I never forgot to thank anyone and never forgot anyone's name, which was not what confused people usually did. Carol made the call. I said only 3 words when she handed me the receiver. Mr. Dufresne's name. He arrived the next morning with a provincial capacity assessor. I answered every question correctly. The assessor, a woman who had clearly done this many times and had very steady eyes, concluded in writing that I showed no cognitive impairment of any kind and that the placement had been made on the basis of representations that did not reflect her clinical findings. She noted that I was entitled to know my rights as a retirement residence resident, which included the right to refuse to remain. Leanne arrived at the residence before I could leave. She stood in the carpeted lobby with a new folder. More forms, she said, just to make things official. And when she saw the assessor standing beside me, her face did something complicated. She said she was glad I'd had the evaluation. She said she had only ever wanted the right supports in place. That was when the man I did not know walked through the front doors. He was tall, with a gray beard and a dark green rain jacket, and he was carrying a brown envelope in both hands. He stopped at the front desk and asked for Francine Gallant. The woman at the desk looked at Leanne, who was listed as my primary contact. Leanne said she was my daughter and asked who he was. He said his name was Wendell Corrigan and that he had worked with my husband and that he had a private matter to discuss with me, personally. Leanne said she could handle any of my correspondence. Wendell looked past her to me. I said I would like to speak with him alone. We sat in the small visiting room off the lobby, the one with the artificial ficus and chairs that faced each other at the angle, designed to suggest conversation. Wendell said he was sorry for the delay in finding me. He said Walter had asked him to do something years ago, and he had waited until he was certain it was necessary. I had never heard Walter mention Wendell Corrigan. Walter had said that was the point. Wendell had been a colleague of Walter's at the provincial ministry before Walter moved to private contracting. They had stayed in contact through the years, letters mostly and occasional calls. Walter had not told me because he wanted someone outside our family to hold a particular piece of information. Someone Leanne had never met and therefore could not pressure. He had not expected to need it. He prepared for it anyway. Walter had, without telling me, established a testamentary trust through a separate estate lawyer in Ottawa. Not Mr. Dufresne, someone I had never heard of. Using proceeds from a long-matured investment that predated our marriage and that had grown quietly for 3 decades. The trust was not registered in my name or his. It was registered in the name of the Gallant Family Educational Foundation, a small charitable entity registered federally. I was the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary during my lifetime. Inside the envelope was a letter in Walter's handwriting, a small key, and a photocopy of the trust deed. My dear Francine, if Wendell has found you, then the thing I hoped would not happen has happened, and I am sorrier than I can say that I am not there to face it with you. I am not writing because I expect Leanne to become our enemy. I am writing because I know how much you love her, and I know that love has a way of making danger look like need, until the need has become everything. I could not protect you from the grief of losing me, but I could give you something that was yours alone, that no one in our family could borrow against or question or call evidence that you were not fit to manage your own life. The foundation holds most of what remains from the Neville Street property sale, grown over time. The trust is worth approximately $2.4 million today. It belongs entirely to you. It can fund your legal costs, your housing, your choices, whatever you need it to do. Use it to rebuild. Do not use it to punish. Love, Walter. I held the letter for a long time. The artificial ficus cast a thin shadow across my lap. I asked Wendell why he had come personally. He said because Walter had been the kind of man who showed up when it mattered, and Wendell had been in his debt for a long time. He had been looking for me for 9 days, since a piece of mail had come back to him from my home address marked undeliverable because the mail had been forwarded. He had traced the forwarding address to Rideau Gardens. I asked him to call Mr. Dufresne. He placed his phone on the table and did it while I sat beside him. Within 2 days, the trust was confirmed through the Federal Registry. An independent review of the retirement home admission found that it had not met the consent requirements under the province's retirement home legislation. Rideau Gardens apologized formally and waived the fees for my stay. At the Consent and Capacity Board hearing, Leanne arrived with a lawyer and a printed file that included photographs of my untidy desk, a list of appointments she claimed I had missed, and a transcript of what she described as a confused phone call I had made to her in September. My phone records showed I had not called her on the date she cited. Her lawyer said the transcript was from memory. The board did not find it persuasive. Mr. Dufresne placed the attempted bank transfer on the table. He placed the capacity assessor's report beside it. He placed the retirement home admission form, signed by Leanne, beside that. The board denied Leanne's application for substitute decision-maker status. It also referred the attempted transfer and the retirement home admission to provincial authorities for review under the Elder Financial Abuse provisions of the Substitute Decisions Act. This was not something I had asked for. It came from the board's own findings. I want to be honest about that. I did not push for charges. The process moved itself once the evidence was in front of the right people. Brent did not attend the hearing. He and Leanne had been at significant odds in the weeks prior, and Bryn had stopped returning Leanne's calls after she read the hearing documents. Bryn had driven down from Kingston the morning after I left Rideau Gardens. She sat across from me at a diner table and held my hands in both of hers and said she had not known. I believed her. She had been away at school and Leanne had told her I was resting and settling in. She had not known what settling in actually meant. I did not go back to the house on Palmer Crescent. Walter had loved that house most, and after everything that had happened inside it, I found I could not make it feel safe again. I sold it through an agent Mr. Dufresne recommended, and the proceeds went into the trust alongside everything else. I found a small apartment in Westport, on the 2nd floor of an older building, close enough to the water that I could hear the boats in summer. I hired a part-time helper, a woman named Chantal who came Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and helped with groceries and appointments, and who had been very clear in the interview that she was there to assist, not to supervise. I appreciated the distinction. I asked her to put it in the contract. Bryn visited every few weeks. We walked along the waterfront when the weather allowed. She was good company, the kind that does not require constant filling of silence. I did not tell her how to feel about Leanne. She was working that out for herself, which was the right order of things. A portion of the transferred funds, money Leanne and Brent had moved through the numbered company into a renovation loan before it was flagged, was returned through a civil judgment. Not all of it. Enough. Wendell visited twice that first autumn. He brought smoked fish from a market in Ottawa and a book about the engineering history of the Rideau Canal that Walter had always meant to read. On his second visit, I made proper tea, not the pale water from the residence cart, and we sat on the small balcony and he told me stories about Walter I had never heard. Most of them made me laugh. One of them made me understand, for the first time, why Walter had trusted a man I had never met to carry something so important for so long. I asked Wendell whether Walter had truly believed Leanne would go this far. He was quiet for a moment. He said Walter had believed Leanne loved me. He had also believed that Brent pushed her in directions she would not have chosen on her own, and that the combination of debt and access and grief was more than some people could resist. He said Walter had not prepared the trust as a prediction of betrayal. He had prepared it because he wanted me to have choices no matter what happened. I thought about that for a long time after Wendell left. The following spring, I applied for a small business license and began running one afternoon. A week used book sales from the building's common room, open to residents and the public. The building manager was enthusiastic. 3 neighbors asked to help. By June, we were clearing enough to donate to the local literacy program, which felt like the right use of it. Leanne called me once, 5 months after the hearing. She left a voicemail. She said she was sorry, and that she had told herself for so long that she was managing things for my benefit that she had stopped examining whether that was true. It was a careful message. It sounded like something she had written out first. I listened to it 3 times before I responded. I told her that an apology was a beginning, not a resolution. I told her that if she wanted to rebuild something, it would take years, not a phone call, and that I would need to see how she acted toward Bryn before I could trust anything she said about family. I told her I was not interested in punishing her. I was also not interested in pretending. She said she understood. I said I would be in touch when I was ready. I have not yet decided when that will be. Walter's letter sits in a box on my bookshelf, beside a photograph of us, standing in front of Corner Leaf Books the week we opened, both of us slightly alarmed at what we had just done. The red door looks very bright in the picture. I don't remember it being that bright. He knew me well enough to know I would forgive too easily if I was not also given the means to protect myself first. He knew I would want to find the good in Leanne and call that enough, so he gave me the trust. Not so I could win, but so I could choose. That distinction is the whole of it. Real love does not hand you a form and call it care. Real love leaves you the means to walk away if you need to, and trusts you to know whether you do. I knew. It just took the right envelope, carried by the right stranger, to remind me that I had never stopped knowing at all.